This tricky topic will focus on Freud's theories and evaluate the useful and not so useful contributions to the study of personality. But before we delve into Freud, let's review what's meant by this term. Psychologists define personality as a unique and enduring set of behaviors, thoughts, feelings, and motives that characterize an individual. So personality is what makes us us and not someone else. According to this definition, personality stays relatively stable over time and across different situations. This is really useful to us. We use personality information all the time because it allows us to predict what people like and dislike and how they'll behave under certain circumstances. When we're buying gifts, planning a party, or choosing a romantic partner, what we know about others' personalities guides our decisions. Let's look at an example. Both of these kids shown here on the right were just told by their parents that they are moving across the country and will have to go to a new school and make new friends. Which girl will feel most distressed by this? Most of us would choose the girl on the top. And if these images are indeed true reflections of their personalities, we'd probably be right. So where does Freud fit into all of this? His perspective on personality is closely tied to his approach to treating mental illness, which is what he's most famous for. Freud's biggest legacy is his creation of the field of psychoanalysis, a strategy of using talk therapy as a way to modify behavior. Freud's name, for many people, conjures up an image like this one. Someone lying on an armless couch, revealing their innermost desires to a therapist who sits in the background, taking notes and making interpretations. Although Freud's exact therapeutic techniques aren't as widely used today, this treatment approach is one of the foundations of modern clinical psychology. Freud's approach to treatment rested heavily on the assumption that a big part of who we are comes from our early life experiences, which can result in a unique and enduring set of behaviors, thoughts, feelings, and motives that characterize an individual. Keep in mind that this is our working definition of personality. So let's look at Freud in more detail. Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist and one of the best-known figures in modern psychology. Freud's clinical practice was heavily influenced by a fellowship to study with French neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot in 1885. Charcot was exploring hypnosis as a way to treat patients with what was known at the time as hysteria, a disorder of physical complaints with no known cause. From this, Freud became interested in the power of the unconscious mind, and he developed techniques, including dream analysis and free association, to unlock the mind's unconscious motives. The foundation of Freud's ideas about personality and mental illness was his representation of how the mind is structured. He stated that the mind has 3 layers of consciousness: the conscious, which is whatever is going on in your mind right now; the preconscious, which are things that can be called into conscious thought; and the unconscious mind, which is all the stuff that sits outside conscious awareness, but can have powerful effects on thought and behavior. Freud believed that the unconscious mind was the largest component of consciousness. In addition to these different levels of consciousness, Freud also hypothesized that there are 3 distinct components or provinces that control the impulses that arise from the unconscious. According to Freud, the id is the first to develop and is the seat of impulse and desire. It operates on the pleasure principle and guides behavior to self-gratification. The ego is the next to develop, around the first year of life, and operates on the reality principle and makes realistic attempts to obtain self-gratification. Unlike the id, the ego has direct contact with the outside world. And last is the superego, which develops around ages 2 to 3 and operates on the moral principle. It evaluates our actions in terms of right or wrong. According to Freud, the superego is in constant battle with the id to try and control unconscious urges and desires. So how does this influence personality? According to Freud, in a psychologically healthy person, the ego strikes a balance between the urges of the id and the control exerted by the superego. In contrast, an overly controlling person has a relatively large superego that represses the urges of the id. On the other hand, in someone who is an overly impulsive person, the id predominates, so the individual seeks pleasure without the right balance of moral guidance. Freud hypothesized that dealing with the impulses of the id can cause problems. So he theorized that the mind uses defense mechanisms to protect itself from the threat of anxiety-promoting thoughts or impulses that arise from the id. Freud stated that these defense mechanisms operate unconsciously and deny or distort reality in some way. Now, although these were first proposed by Sigmund Freud, they were really worked out by his daughter, Anna. The best described of the defense mechanisms is repression, which is keeping unpleasant thoughts, feelings, or impulses out of conscious awareness. Reaction formation is turning an unpleasant idea, feeling, or impulse into its opposite. Projection is described as denying or repressing ideas, feelings, or impulses and projecting them onto others. Sublimation is expressing socially unacceptable impulses into a socially acceptable way. And finally, fixation is being preoccupied with an earlier stage in development. These defense mechanisms are very popular since it's quite easy to come up with examples. Take reaction formation, for instance. Let's say someone is uncomfortable about the fact that they might have homosexual tendencies, maybe because of the way they were raised. So they deal with this conflict by flipping it around and outwardly expressing homophobia. On the surface, this appears to make sense, but these defense mechanisms are very difficult to test since they deal with thoughts that are unconscious and subjective, so they're very difficult to measure. Furthermore, there's no solid evidence that the id or other provinces exist in the mind, so theories that grow from this assumption are not well supported. Probably one of the most controversial ideas of Freud's is his psychosexual stage theory, summarized in this table. Basically, Freud hypothesized that personality develops in stages throughout early life, and that each age is concerned with pleasure-seeking from a particular area of the body. The first stage, according to this theory, is the oral stage that occurs between birth and around 18 months. Children at this age spend a lot of time putting things into their mouth, and Freud believed that fixations resulted from excessive behaviors in adulthood that involved the mouth, like smoking and sarcasm. The anal stage is next from the ages of 18 to 36 months, where children spend a lot of time learning how to potty train. Fixations on the anal region at this stage result in obsessive and compulsive cleaning behaviors. That's where the term anal retentive comes from. The other stages are equally bizarre. But more importantly, from a scientific point of view, they're not grounded in sufficient evidence. In fact, since these theories were developed, there has been absolutely no support for this view of personality. It did open the door, however, for the idea that early life experiences can affect thought and behavior in adulthood. So to summarize, Freud had a powerful influence not just on the study of personality, but also clinical psychology. If we look at the evidence that has amassed since Freud proposed these theories, there's certainly evidence for a powerful role of unconscious thought processes, which has been embraced by cognitive psychologists and rebranded as implicit thinking. Also, the role of early life experiences in adult behavior has been supported by research in behavioral neuroscience, especially with the field of epigenetics, which has revealed long-term changes in gene expression as a result of early life events. This idea has also been influential in clinical psychology, with studies of the effect of early life trauma. However, the psychosexual stages of development theory, which is the one that's most directly tied to ideas of personality, has not been supported with scientific evidence. Sigmund Freud is arguably psychology's best known and most controversial figure, but his ideas have contributed more to literature than they have to the study of personality. He introduced some ideas that did not withstand later scientific scrutiny, but he did make some important contributions to our understanding of the influence of early life events and the role of the unconscious.